Indo-European castes, Rigstulan, and the Nordic castes. All Indo-European peoples have had a trifunctional view of the world, and they have also applied it to the society. Thus divided, the Indian Aryans in the Brahmins, the priests, Kshatriyas, the warriors, and Vaishyas, merchants, and Iranians in Athrayavas, lords of fire, priest castes, Rathayasta, warrior caste, and Vastriya Pushayant, the head's family. When they subordinated peoples under them that were not Indo-Europeans, they became a fourth servant caste. The trifunctional caste system was so deeply rooted in our Indo-European ancestors that it got resurrected spontaneously even during the Christian Middle Ages with the three social castes: orators, those who pray; belloratores, those who wage war; and laboratores, those who do work. One can further continue the list with exotic names of castes even among the Celts, Greeks, and Romans, but it is more fruitful for me to turn to my own more direct ancestors, even though we're all very related in body, mind, and soul, belonging to the same Indo-European family. Among my forefathers, the caste system is explained in the Rigstulan, the story of how Heimdall, under the name Rig, visits the humans and becomes the ancestor of the three castes: Earl, Jarlar, men, Karlar, and Thrall, or slaves, Trälar. My presentation is deliberately going to be somewhat speculative to fuel the imagination of the listeners. Rigstulan in its entirety is available to read if you're familiar with the Swedish language, and if you click the link in the information box below. Rigstulan. Rig, or Heimdall, first visits A and Edda, and then thereafter Edda give birth to a swarthy son named Thrall, meaning slave. He then visits Ave and Ama, where he gets the Rudi, in for you Swedes, Rödletta, son named Karl, meaning men. And then finally he visits father and mother, Fader och Moder, where he gets the blonde son Jarl, meaning earl. Rig then visits Jarl again, a second time, when he has become a man, and teaches him the runes. Jarl then gets several sons, of whom the youngest, Kon, again becomes a rune master and can speak to the birds. It is interesting how Rigstulan's authors connect the physical types in the Nordic countries to the three castes. Thrall is both swarthy, coarse, and ugly, and his wife, the Thrallina, had a long, very hooked nose. It's probably because of the Nordic indigenous peoples of Tydal, which today is situated in the boundary between Norway and Sweden with the same name now as then. Tydal, you see, is a Cro-Magnoid subracial type, but a swarthy one, and it is quite possible that they periodically got enslaved by the invading tribes of Indo-European racial types. At the same time, it is probably an idealized image of reality that Rigstulan gives us. A hero that later gets mentioned, like Hagen of Tronje, is described as swarthy and broad enough to be a Tydal native, for an example. Karl is described as having ruddy skin and ginger hair, possessing quick eyes. Spontaneously, I think Celtic, and I don't think it's impossible that the Vana culture had Celtic elements, both in sub-racial type and in culture. However, this is pure speculation on my part. Jarl is described as the classic Nordid sub-racial type, with bleached hair, reddish cheeks, and eyes quick as tadpoles. There has sometimes been presented a theory about our forefathers, which claimed that the Nordic areas were invaded 3 times of different Indo-European tribes, and that each wave of immigrants had their own pantheon, its own god family. First came the Hell worshippers that worshipped the giants. They may possibly have been Cro-Magnoids. After that, the worshippers of the Vana gods immigrated, and then finally the worshippers of the Asa gods, the worshipper of the Aesir. It's likely that these were different subracial types. The absence of the Brahmin caste. The attentive person will note that the Nordic castes, as they are described in Rigstulan, not really match the traditional Indo-European castes. Karl is the peasantry caste, and Jarl the warrior caste, but Thrall, or Träl, is not one of the 3 Indo-European ancient castes, but is instead our answer to the Sudra or Sudra caste. And where are the Brahmins? I have in the summary of Dumesil's Mitra Varuna suggested that it may very well be so that in the Nordic countries there never emerged, or there never continued to be inherited, a Brahmin caste. Instead, we kept the Gandharva caste into historical times instead. Both Gandharvas and Brahmins belong to the first function of sovereignty, but while the Brahmins are priests, sworn for Mitra and, in our example, Tyr, the Gandharvas warriors mystics, sworn for Varuna and, for our example, Odin. And the Nordic countries remained a warrior society in a way that neither Rome or India did. Why Odin was the head god, and why even federations of warrior mystics kept their status. While in Greece one had relegated the Centaurs to the memories of a dim past, and while one in Rome just celebrated Lupercali once a year, there were berserkers and wolf heathens very central in the heart of the Nordic society. Another possible explanation put forward is that Jarl's son, Kon, can be seen as the first Brahmin in the north, and that it is because the Christians have destroyed so much of our stories that we do not know more about this than the vague hints of Rigstulan. It is not uncommon among other Indo-European peoples that the nation founder or the founder of the nations instituted the Brahmin caste, and because of this, it's not surprising that Kon, time-wise, appears after Jarl. When you read about Kon, I feel that it is more a characteristic of Gandharvas to talk to the birds than a characteristic of Brahmins. My knowledge in this particular area, however, is limited, and the opinions I might receive I will therefore receive gratefully. Castes today. So what insights does Rigstulan have to offer us today? Must we force the swarthy indigenous Swedes to clean toilets, and reserve the armed forces to blonde kinsmen? It sounds neither particularly healthy nor realistic. What we instead should do is to discern the core, the basic idea inside of the caste ideology. And the basic idea is that people are different. The basic idea is anti-egalitarian. When our contemporaries spend their time watching Big Brother and buying Lady Gaga's new album, we, we can therefore not hate them or look down on them. They are slaves, they are thralls, they are men, while we, perhaps, are different in nature from them. But in our different nature, there also lies a greater responsibility that we have for them. And thus it is as much greater tragedy when we get stuck in the swamp of soap operas than when they do it. We ought to be predisposed to know better and act better than they, and thus it's more of a conscious effort on our part to fall into the same modern traps as they have done. If not even people like us can resist the times, then there's no hope. We have a responsibility to ensure that they don't hurt themselves or anyone around them. We should therefore not stare ourselves blind at historical forms of the caste system, for an example, that it often was inherited or that it was linked to races and subraces, but we should instead focus on the content. And like Julius Vola and Raisin's Soul, let's face it, perhaps races and subraces are tied to castes, but then again, if you compare yourself to these people here, I think you'll find in your heart that you're not in the same caste. You know better, and you have a responsibility. Do not fall into their traps, and ensure that they don't hurt themselves or others. The caste system is not entirely tied to race and subraces. We should also focus on the content of the character. And if nothing else, at least it was a history lesson.